I've chosen quotations at random. In fact, you chose the quotations, didn't you? And I want to show you something really important. Don't get hung up on the actual scene and which are the best quotations. You could almost pick them with your eyes shut. The thinking you've already done about Lady Macbeth is going to allow you to do the assessment, which is why I'm going to choose the quotations that you've just given me. So I'm going to begin with the first witch. Might seem odd to start not with Lady Macbeth at all, but I'm doing that to look at the social context, because that's going to get me higher grades. And the first witch gives us an insight into how women were treated at the time. Why have the witches decided to control Macbeth? There are 3 of them, and their meeting is inauspicious. It's in thunder, it's in lightning, it's rain. We've got pathetic fallacy here. Shakespeare, or the witches themselves, could be creating this weather in order to control the thoughts of men. And the question we ask ourselves at the beginning is going to be quite crucial. Are they controlling Macbeth in order to attack Lady Macbeth? Or are they going to damage Lady Macbeth by accident, if you like, just as a way to control Macbeth? And I'll try and remember to answer that question as we move on. This is the first words that the witches speak to Banquo. Banquo is lesser than Macbeth, but he's also greater. And so this is our first clue into what the witches are up to. They're obsessed with status. And you can read the whole play as an exploration of status. And you can look at Lady Macbeth. Everything that drives her is about becoming queen, about her status. And so I'm going to try and base my argument around this. Lady Macbeth is forced into acquiring more power in order to raise her status. But because she's living at a time where women cannot have status in their own right, she has to do it through her partner, through Macbeth. So one way of looking at this play is to say that this tragedy would not have happened if women had the same rights as men. If Lady Macbeth could have achieved power by herself, she wouldn't have to manipulate Macbeth. She wouldn't have had to become evil. And so that could be one interpretation of the play. All the tragedy is because women are denied power. If you think about it, the 3 witches are all female. And so again, the tragedy only happens because women are denied power. In Shakespeare's society, to become powerful as a woman, you either had to be born wealthy into a wealthy family and marry rich, like Lady Macbeth has done with Macbeth, or you had to be attractive, and so you could attract the best mate within your own economic circle. Our witches are described as hideous and hags and weird sisters. They're obviously ugly. And so the play might show us that you turn to evil as a woman because no other avenue is open to you to gain power. The only way the witches can gain power is through evil, because they're denied rights as women. This is the letter that Macbeth writes to Lady Macbeth. And I love this one because it explores the level of choice that Lady Macbeth has. So when I look at this, I always ask myself this question. Macbeth is going to arrive within hours to see his wife. He never has to send this letter. Why does he do it? And at the minute, I like the theory that he knows what his wife's like, and he is manipulating her. He wants her to have come up with a plan when he arrives. He wants her to start manipulating him, because he knows without her, he's less of a man. Without her, he won't go through with what he desperately wants to do, which is to kill Duncan. And look at the buttons that he pushes here. He calls her my dearest partner in greatness. Do you remember I talked about status? And he's saying, look, Lady Macbeth, I know that status is the thing that gets you. And so I'm going to use this idea. You're going to get greater status. You're going to become queen. I'm going to use this to get you to start thinking about how it's going to happen. He doesn't spell that out, but I think that's the subtext of the letter. The language that he uses looks very formal to us, but when in Shakespeare's time you use thou and thy, that's actually more intimate than you and your. And so he's using a much more intimate language with his wife to persuade her. to start taking action without spelling that out. Again, he repeats the idea of greatness. It's your status, he's saying to her. He wants to manipulate her thoughts. And then there's this promise of love here, lay it to thy heart, a declaration of his love for her. But the love doesn't come first. The love is dependent on her becoming greater. And it sounds like he needs her to want to become queen in order for him to show love to her. In other words, he wants her to come up with this plan to kill Duncan, even though he's never spelt that out. Next slide. So this is Lady Macbeth's reaction. She knows her husband, I think, just as well as he knows her. So she talks about what he would wrongly win. She knows he wants to become king, but he has to do wrong to get there. Again, she's using the same intimate language as her husband. She's in love with him here, thou. She picks up that word greatness and mimics it with great. And that's what people do when they're in alignment. If you've looked at any psychological studies, or if you've watched something like The Mentalist, you'll see that if you start mimicking someone's body language, their body language then starts to mimic yours, and then you can change your body language, and then they will copy what you're doing without even knowing that's what they're doing. My son amuses himself with that in class. Just tries to control people. And this level of control, I think, is reflected in the language. Lady Macbeth is starting to use the same language as Macbeth to show she's aligned to him, she's in sync with him. So, the repetition of thou, again, towards the end, is really showing the bond that they have. Together, they're going to be able to carry out this plan, and that's going to be important, as you know. Later they fall apart. Then something extraordinary happens. Lady Macbeth decides she can't do this on her own, and so she calls on supernatural help, the spirits. And many people see the spirits as the witches. Some people argue that Lady Macbeth is the worst witch in the play. She's the most evil. But here, it's not so much that she wants to become evil, it's this. In order to become evil, she has to be unsexed. And this brings us back to the role of women again. She's saying, as a woman, I'm not powerful enough to do what I have to do. I have to become a male. So we're reminded she's in a patriarchal society, a society controlled by men, and the only way for her to gain power, in her mind, is to become more masculine. And ultimately, that's going to be Lady Macbeth's tragedy. When we see her die, she becomes a lot more feminine. When she's sleepwalking, she starts fixating on her feminine attributes, her small hands, the perfume. She no longer wants to be male. She realises trying to become male has ruined her, and that's what drives her mad. But she doesn't know that yet. She feels the only way to gain power in this society is to become more masculine. And you can see she's also obsessed with status. So although she's talking about her body and talking about her crown and her toe, obviously we're supposed to understand that she's also fixated on the crown, becoming queen. She's also fixated on becoming queen, though, because that's not enough. When she gets the crown, she can never be king. She can never be the ruler, no matter how intelligent she is, no matter how persuasive she is. Macbeth will always have that. And I think that's something that also affects her deeply and leads to her death. As soon as they've hatched the plan to kill Duncan, which I think is the plan Macbeth wanted, Lady Macbeth finds herself taking control of the marriage. And time again, we see her commanding Macbeth. Here she is, schooling him, teaching him. Your face, she says to him, is like a book. It starts like an insult. Yeah, that actually sounds like an insult. And then she has to modify her language. Oh, I've got to persuade my husband here. And instead of using a term of endearment, my dearest partner in greatness, remember, is what Macbeth called her, she calls him my thane. Again, she needs to raise up his status so that he feels superior, so she can control him by being superior herself. And she does that really subtly through this language. She then tries to distance herself from the implied criticism here by saying, look, it's men who are going to be able to read your features. Again, she's trying to tell Macbeth that he's more important because he's a man. But I think that is what frustrates her. She believes she should have at least as much power as him, but she has to pretend that men are more important. Once she has persuaded him, Macbeth's reaction may seem quite childish. What if we fail? And Lady Macbeth's reaction is an incredibly masculine one. Then we fail. You just have to take the risk and do it. You've got to resolve yourself to action. And Shakespeare does this quite deliberately. Normally we expect his lines to be 10 syllables long in iambic pentameter. Here that rhythm is dramatically broken up because it shows us a change is happening. Macbeth is more feminine, being more cautious, feminine in terms of the way Shakespeare would have seen women, or Shakespeare's audience would. Lady Macbeth is becoming more male. She's taking control and saying, let's do it. She's the character who believes in action. But, although she wants to become more male, there appears to be a real flaw in her psychology, and she can't do it. This is quite extraordinary. So sometimes I look at this and I think, Lady Macbeth has planned this all along. She said to her husband, look, let's go and kill Duncan, and then you can become king, I'll become queen. And she knows all along that she won't be able to kill Duncan herself, because that was her way of persuading Macbeth. I'll do it, leave it to me. Put this night's great business into my dispatch. I'll do it. So one way of looking at that is it's a lie. It was just there to get Macbeth into the right frame of mind to kill Duncan himself. But what if it's not a lie? What if it's actually true? So you can read this as Lady Macbeth going in to see Duncan, thinking, right, I'm going to kill you, and then suddenly being struck at how he looks like her father. And this brings out all her feminine feelings. It makes her too much of a woman to be cruel and kill. And so she has to get Macbeth to do it. Another way of looking at it is that it reinforces this idea of the patriarchal society. So even though Lady Macbeth wants to break free of men, ultimately men are still controlling her. And she can't help it. It's a genetic link. She sees her father, she thinks, I cannot go against my father. And even though Duncan isn't her real father, he is the father of her country. And that symbolism of men being in control is too much for her to overcome. So perhaps at this moment she realises she will never, men are still controlling her, and she can't help it. It's a genetic link. She sees her father, she thinks, I cannot go against my father, and even though Duncan isn't her real father, he is the father of her country. And that symbolism of men being in control is too much for her to overcome. So perhaps at this moment she realises she will never be able to get as much power as Macbeth. Men will always have that power, and this could be part of her tragedy. She lives in a time where women can't be themselves. Once Macbeth has killed Duncan, he now starts to dispose of his wife. The first thing he does is dispose of their plan, which was to leave the daggers on the grooms to frame the grooms. It has to look like they did it. And Lady Macbeth can instantly see that her husband started to abandon her. She's got to do it herself. He is becoming infirm. Again, he's becoming more feminine, weaker. She is having to become stronger with more purpose, and so she has to go and plant the daggers. When we see her sleepwalking, it's that blood from that dagger, or from those daggers, that is obsessing her. Perhaps it's not the guilt that's killing her. Perhaps it's the knowledge that from this moment their marriage has fallen apart and she can never get the power that she wanted. You stitched me up with this one because we're looking for Lady Macbeth. However, I wanted to show that any quotation can be used to bend to fit your argument. So here we go. This is Donalbain, the king's son, and he's saying, what should be spoken here, where our fate, hid in an auger hole, may rush and seize us. And so I'm instantly going to fixate on this word fate. Because that's a question Shakespeare asks us. Does the tragedy happen because it's already mapped out and it's got to happen? Is fate controlling you like a puppet master? Or is there something in you that contributes to that fate? The Greeks, who invented tragedy, created what they called the tragic flaw that a hero would have. So Macbeth is a noble man, but his one tragic flaw is ambition. And that ambition contributes to the tragedy. Without the ambition, everything would have been fine. And that's a way of reading Lady Macbeth's character. She's a loving wife, but something in you that contributes to that fate. The Greeks, who invented tragedy, created what they called the tragic flaw that a hero would have. So Macbeth is a noble man, but his one tragic flaw is ambition. And that ambition contributes to the tragedy. Without the ambition, everything would have been fine. And that's a way of reading Lady Macbeth's character. She's a loving wife, but her one flaw is ambition. You can look at it like that. So fate is acting on that one flaw. However, we've also got this little problem, the auger hole, which I had to go away and research. So if we go to the next screen. Auger has two meanings depending on how you spell it. So the auger hole is produced by this drill. You can look at it like that. So fate is acting on that one flaw. However, we've also got this little problem, the auger hole, which I had to go away and research. So if we go to the next screen. Auger has two meanings depending on how you spell it. So the auger hole is produced by this drill, and you'd use it to create a hole to put fence posts in or foundations. So Malcolm is worried about the foundation that has been laid in killing Duncan. You know, so if they've started to kill Duncan, what's going to happen next? They'll kill the sons. What's going to happen next? They'll kill anyone else who's not in league with Macbeth. And that gradually you build up this house of destruction. But the other meaning of augur is to be able to foretell the future. So if we go back to my quotation, this idea of the future being foretold asks us to question whether we're in control of our own futures or not. And I've already been suggesting to you that as a woman, actually you don't have control of your future. You are who you are, and who you marry, and who your parents are. There's very little choice for you. And so Lady Macbeth's tragedy continually comes back to that. She's got to break out of this society that stops her choosing. Let's move back on. Right. Macbeth, once they've killed Duncan, realises that he's still plagued with worries about Banquo. He's trying to use inclusive language here, we, to show that there's still a partnership between them. But look who the enemy is. The enemy is Banquo. But suddenly, Banquo has become a snake, and the snake has become she. And I think this is a psychological slip. Macbeth is starting to see Lady Macbeth as the enemy, because she's become more masculine than him, and he's become more feminine. And he can't accept that. In a male-dominated society, with him as the king, he can't accept that his wife is a better king than he is a better man than he is. And so gradually he starts to turn on her. And so he tries to say to her, look, we're still together, but underneath it, the subtext, he sees the snake as female. And this reminds us of that bit of advice that Lady Macbeth gave him, look like the innocent flower, but be the snake under it. He sees her as the snake, she. And this is our first clue that he's turned against her. Next. Here, he's also turned against her, and it looks like love. He's planning to kill Macduff's family. But he doesn't tell his wife that's what he's going to do. Be innocent of the knowledge. it sounds like he's protecting her, but actually he's excluding her. He's not letting her into his decision making. Remember, she planned the killing of Duncan and they got away with it, even though he mucked up the plan twice. He didn't take daggers back, and then he killed the grooms when they were supposed to stay alive and take the rap for the killing. He's already sabotaged her planning twice. Her planning is much better than his, but he deliberately excludes her now. He knows she's better, but he can't face that knowledge, and so he excludes her from it. The dearest Chuck can be seen as an endearment. Chuck is a chicken, but there's also a level of level of insult there, isn't there? Oh, my little chicken, don't worry about it. It's patronising, and he's starting to really belittle his wife and put her down. This is another instance of how Lady Macbeth has to start taking control. So, at the banquet, where Macbeth is worried about whether the plan to kill Banquo and Fleance has succeeded, she's had to take over the role of the king. She's commanding all the other thanes to sit down. She's taking that role. She also gives the command of when they should seat. So sit down, everybody. She gives the toast earlier on. She takes over the whole proceedings. She's also intellectually really quite brilliant. Macbeth is suddenly seeing a ghost, screaming at it, throwing his wine at it, causing a spectacle in front of everyone, and she saves the day. She says, oh, this is a fit that he's had since he was a child. Don't worry, it'll pass in a minute. Really thinks on her feet. She's having to prove herself better than her husband all the time, but he keeps letting her down. Now we have the sleepwalking scene. It is an accustomed action with her. So for nights and nights, she's been trying to wash the blood off her hands. This is really revealing. Macbeth is obviously not sleeping with his wife anymore. He doesn't come out with her. He doesn't try to protect her when she's walking around. He's just found out that this is what she's doing. They are out of love, or at least he is out of love with her. The idea that she's trying to wash her hands reminds us of Pontius Pilate, the ruler of Judea who sacrificed Jesus. And this biblical reference is used by Shakespeare to suggest that maybe she's starting to think about her soul. Is she going to go to hell? Has what she's done corrupted her soul forever? And that's an important question, because Lady Macbeth actually hasn't done anything. All she's done is try to persuade Macbeth to kill Duncan. She herself has done nothing. Just before she dies, Macbeth knows he's going to die. He's seen that Burnham Wood is coming up Dunsinane Hill, which the witches said would be the sign that he was going to be defeated. He believed that could never happen, but now it is happening. But what he really fears is his wife. His wife has become a much better man than him. He is preparing himself for death, and he's enjoying it. The taste of fear is something that he's looking forward to. Then we have a blank screen. Interestingly, when you chose that quotation, can we go back? You decided not to choose his reaction to his wife's death. Instinctively, you've done what Shakespeare did. He doesn't show us Lady Macbeth's death. And I think he does that for a reason. And the reason is to show that women have no power, and therefore he denies us seeing her. You can read this as a feminist version of the play. Shakespeare thinks the whole tragedy would never happen if women were allowed power in his society. Or you can read it the other way. The whole tragedy would never have happened if women accepted where they should be, below the status of men. Well, I prefer the second version. Sorry, I prefer the first version. We'll edit that out because I've only got 2 minutes left.
Have you got with you?
I do.
Can you ask her to call me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mystery girl, you have to call your mum at break. I'll tell you in a minute who you are.
You got 50 seconds.
50 seconds? I can wrap it up in 50 seconds. In conclusion, the tragedy of Lady Macbeth is that she is denied rights in a patriarchal society. These lack of rights drive her towards the only success she can achieve, which is through her man, through her husband. And Shakespeare shows us quite clearly that the seeds of destruction of the patriarchal society are the very thing that oppresses women. If you oppress women, they will turn against you. You will die.